Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a massive, totally counterintuitive contradiction right at the heart of modern society. It's a paradox that shapes our laws, our economy, and literally millions of lives. But somehow it mostly flies completely under the radar. We're going to unpack how our deeply held beliefs about economics are directly and surprisingly tied to our massive system of punishment.
To really get this paradox, we got to start with a foundational myth. Back in 2008, Barack Obama said something on the campaign trail that perfectly captures this widely accepted belief across the whole political spectrum. Basically, the idea is that free markets inherently equal personal and political freedom. We all just kind of assume that a hands-off approach to the economy is, well, the natural order of things.
And you know, this isn't just some political talking point. Milton Friedman, literally one of the most influential economists of the 20th century, stated this as an absolute truth. For decades, the dominant logic has been that the less the government intervenes, the freer the society. Period. This whole free enterprise philosophy, it's a doctrine championed all over the globe.
But then, we hit this number, 2.3 million. That's the staggering amount of people incarcerated right now in the United States. To put that into perspective, it instantly completely shatters the narrative we just talked about. I mean, think about it. How can a society that so loudly champions a hands-off government in its markets simultaneously operate the most hands-on, interventionist apparatus of state punishment in human history?
When we zoom out and look globally, the contrast is just wild. The U.S. imprisons roughly 1% of its entire adult population. Even China, with a vastly larger total population, has fewer people in prison, around 1.5 million. The U.S. incarceration rate is actually 5 times that of England and a whopping 12 times the rate in Japan. So the country most obsessed with economic freedom paradoxically runs the world's largest penal state. No way around it.
Which brings us to a really fascinating investigation by Professor Bernard Harcourt from the University of Chicago. He treats this paradox almost like a historical detective story, like how exactly did a country built on laissez-faire ideals build such a massive, punitive system? While Harcourt argues that both our concept of the free market and our concept of excessive regulation are actually illusions, they're fictions. But they're fictions that have very, very real tangible effects on our political condition.
Now, before we crack the prison side of this paradox, we first need to debunk the economic myth itself. To do this, economist Ha-Joon Chang offers some pretty unconventional realities. He famously argued that the washing machine changed the world more than the internet did. Why? Because it fundamentally restructured the labor market by liberating women's time. His whole point here is that our assumptions about what actually drives markets are often just totally wrong. He asserts there is literally no such thing as a completely free market. He points to the 2008 financial crisis as undeniable proof that the neoliberal version of capitalism, the one with minimal government involvement, is deeply flawed. And honestly, that realization is exactly what paves the way for us to see how this illusion applies to criminal justice.
So, carrying that skepticism forward, let's look at Harcourt's historical analysis. He compares two wild extremes. First up, the 18th century Parisian grain market. Classical economists have traditionally viewed this as the ultimate example of a hyper-regulated, oppressive market, right? Then he compares it to the modern Chicago Board of Trade, which is constantly held up as the ultimate modern symbol of the completely free, spontaneous market.
But here's where it gets interesting. Harcourt dug through these 18th century police records in Paris and found something almost comical. Those dreaded regulations we hear about, they were incredibly trivial. Out of hundreds of sentences, a mere 9.2% of police ordinances and 2.6% of major fines even related to grain at all. Do you know what the most common violation was in this supposedly tyrannical, hyper-regulated market? Failing to sweep the sidewalk in front of your shop. Seriously. Conversely, look at the Chicago Board of Trade today. We call it a free market, but in reality, it's governed by a complex, hyper-vigilant web of rules. I'm talking strict trading hours, pervasive price controls, intensive physical surveillance, and deep computer monitoring of every single move. Harcourt uses this to prove an absolutely vital point. The labels of free and regulated simply don't match reality. They're total myths.
So where exactly did this myth come from? And how in the world did it attach itself to mass incarceration? Well, let's trace the intellectual timeline. This odd coupling of hands-off economics and hands-on punishment wasn't just born out of nowhere in the 1970s. Nope, it goes all the way back to the 18th century, right when the very concept of the free market was first emerging. It all started with a group of mid-18th century French thinkers known as the physiocrats.
Their name literally translates to the rule of nature. They argue that economic exchange is this natural order that needs zero outside intervention. But, and this is the absolute kicker, they believe that any transgressions against this natural economic order required severe, almost tyrannical punishment. So right there, they planted the seed, an artificially free economy paired closely with an exceptionally harsh penal sphere.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit to the late 20th century. By the 1960s and 70s, crime was being seized upon as a massive political platform. Politicians began using law and order as a wedge issue to basically dismantle existing welfare programs. The fundamental argument completely shifted. By the 1980s, the political rhetoric was that the state could more effectively help the poor by scaling back public assistance and aggressively expanding the criminal justice system. This was the exact moment the script flipped on how our tax dollars and state power were actually going to be utilized.
And the real-world result of that ideological shift? It's stark. In the mid-20th century, we relied pretty heavily on a massive system of asylum, institutionalization. But as the ideology changed in the 60s and 70s, those asylums emptied out and the prison population absolutely skyrocketed. The numbers literally cross paths as one system completely replaces the other. Crucially, though, this wasn't just a simple matter of transferring the exact same people from hospitals into prisons. The demographics drastically changed. Back in 1923, asylum patients were nearly half female, overwhelmingly white, and generally older. But today's prison inmates? They're 95% male and heavily skewed toward young African American and Hispanic men. So this was a fundamental shift in who the state decided to govern and exactly how it decided to punish them.
This evolution reflects a deep transformation in how we actually view the government. The mid-century welfare state viewed the government as a protector, focusing more on a rehabilitative model, even if, let's be honest, that model was flawed and ended up overly institutionalizing people. But in stark contrast, the modern neoliberal state treats the prison essentially as a warehouse. It focuses strictly on blameworthiness and punishment. The government is somehow viewed as entirely incompetent in the market, but highly competent when it comes to policing and punishing.
Professor Harcourt summarizes the real danger of this perfectly. He says, "It will not be possible to break the hold of our excessively punitive carceral state unless we first free ourselves from the very language of free markets. The illusion of the free market is dangerous precisely because it artificially lowers our resistance to extreme government intervention in the penal sphere. We basically accept big government in prisons because we mistakenly think we have small government in the economy." So, bringing it all together, we can really see the full architecture of this American paradox. Our economic illusions and our punishment realities, they are deeply intertwined. By blinding ourselves to the reality that literally all markets are regulated, we've allowed politicians to divert state power away from social safety nets and aggressively channel it into a sprawling prison complex. The hands-off market and the hands-on prison are literally two sides of the exact same coin, and understanding this is absolutely crucial because it dictates how your society is built, where government funds flow, and ultimately how justice is defined.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. If free markets and excessive regulation are really just fictions that don't describe reality at all, who actually benefits when we use those labels? And maybe, more importantly, who ends up behind bars as a result? The next time a politician promises a free market, ask yourself, who exactly is paying the price for that freedom? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning what passes as truth.